They saw their small age difference of 40 years because Angelika was 22 at the time and the priest was 62. The police officers took a ground-penetrating radar, brought it into the church, and started moving it around on the floor on the tiles. Not far from the confessional, the ground-penetrating radar showed that something was there. Welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. I'll be honest with you, this is one of the strangest stories I've ever heard. Maybe it's not so much the crime story itself, but the relationships between people that are truly astonishing. I invite you to watch the next episode, which is about both a crime story and some rather strange relationships between people. Angelika was born in 1983 and lived in Glasgow, which is a town in Silesia. Thank you for watching. She was a very nice, diligent student, did well in school, and had an older sister. Since childhood, she was the kind of person, the kind of girl that everyone liked. Very resourceful on one hand, and on the other hand, well-liked. As she was growing up, the neighbors also had the best opinion of her. Unfortunately, when she was just 6 years old, her parents passed away. They decided to separate, and then she and her sister stayed with their father. Meanwhile, their mother just left and went somewhere in the world. I think the fact that she stayed under her father's care also had an impact on her later life. But as I said, she studied well. The separation of her parents didn't really have any psychological effect on what was happening with her. Since childhood, she was basically fascinated with Scandinavia. She wanted to go to Norway. She dreamed of trips like that. And somewhere, when she was still in college, she was about to start her studies. Her older sister went to Scotland and settled there. During her vacation, the sisters decided that maybe the younger Angelika would come to visit her in Scotland. She would find her a job there so she could earn some extra money. They weren't particularly well off at home, and Angelika decided that she would spend the summer of 2005 in Glasgow, where her sister lived. That's exactly what happened. She went to Glasgow and started looking for a job there. Angelika is going to Glasgow. Well, she is already a Scandinavian studies student at the University of Gdansk at that time. She is going to Glasgow. There, her sister helps her find a job, and she actually finds work as a nanny. Angelika doesn't want to cause any trouble for her sister either, so she looks for a place to stay. Her sister helps her and says she's coming. And there's a possibility here that there's St. Patrick's Parish in Glasgow, which is run by a parish priest. There's a priest there that everyone likes very much, Jerry Nugent. Angelika starts living at that parish. She thinks that everyone likes the priest. That he's not just a man who is a priest and performs services, but at the same time he knows how to talk. He asks about what's going on in your life. He just makes a bit of an impression on his parishioners. It seems on the outside that he has a really good connection with them, with the people who live there. And also for such a small, I would say, service at the church. That's watering the flowers, cleaning the church, some small repairs here and there. He allows people to live with him, and that's really how it is. Angelika lives there with him at the rectory. But besides her, there are also other people who can live there in exchange for doing small jobs. The priest is friendly, he talks, and he also makes an impression on Angelika. They talk to each other for a long time and a lot, often. The parish priest makes such an impression on Angelika that a passionate romance begins between them. The fact that there's a small age difference of 40 years between them doesn't bother them, because Angelika is 22 at the time, and the priest 62. Well, this affair lasts the whole summer. Now, I have to admit, the parish priest here at the end, when Angelika was leaving, going back to her country, behaved, I would say, with dignity. He even bought her a laptop for the road, he bought her a plane ticket, and so Angelika returned to Poland. But it seems that for both of them it wasn't just an ordinary affair, because the priest also came to Gdansk. He visited Angelika here in Poland, they met here, and during one of those visits they decided that the next vacation in 2006 Angelika would also spend at his rectory in Glasgow and would go there. And that's exactly what happened. Well, for her, of course, it was good from an economic point of view. Basically, she had a guaranteed job. She worked, or was supposed to continue working, as a nanny. She would have lived at the rectory, so she definitely liked that. That's exactly what happened. The summer holidays of 2006 are starting. Angelika is flying to Glasgow again. She's staying again at the presbytery with the priest. She also works for the same family where she used to take care of the children. And it turns out that a 40-year-old named Martin also works for that family. Martin impresses Angelika again, just like her priest did before. They become lovers. Martin, on the other hand, is simply burdened with a family. He has a wife. His wife quickly realizes that her husband is infatuated, and he has an affair with a 23-year-old Polish woman. At first, she's furious, she's angry. She makes a scene with her husband, but after some time she calms down, because she knows that at some point her husband will have to choose, either her or the lover. She was probably just afraid that her husband would choose the lover. And here I told you at the beginning about those somewhat strange relationships between people, about their choices. And here, Martin's wife chose polyamory. Polyamory is simply loving multiple people. It differs from cheating in that cheating happens secretly. No one knows about it. Polyamory, on the other hand, this is something official. Everyone knows about it. They know the relationships between people. There is trust. Everyone knows who loves whom, on what terms. And basically, nothing bad is happening, because everyone is happy. By the way, all things considered, it's probably this kind of arrangement that Martin's wife accepted. Some people would definitely like it. But getting back to this story, of course, it's a small community. The parish priest very quickly found out that his beloved Angelika, she has a new lover. Despite being a priest, he simply went into a rage. He curses at anything he can. He insulted Angelika. Well, he thought that she belonged to him after all, that she betrayed him, that he's disappointed, and he didn't want to see her at all. Like I told you, the priest was well liked. Well, that's how he was perceived, at least in theory. However, I think not many people from this parish actually knew about it. That the priest simply had a second, darker side. That second, darker side of Father Proboszcz was that he was a drunkard. He got drunk often. He drank it to excess, but that's not all. When the priest was drunk, but also when he was sober. He tried to court his parishioners, and with good results too, because some of the parishioners simply ended up in his bed. But that's not all, because at the rectory there were also women showing up who fulfilled all his desires, because they were prostitutes. There were a lot of these women, both parishioners and prostitutes. They often visited the rectory, And they often had contact with the parish priests. Probably some people knew about these things. Some people talked, well, mostly quietly. No one really spread it around. It was kind of like Paul Snell's secret, that's how I would put it. And there were parishioners and prostitutes, adult women. All in all, they knew what they were doing, but that dark side of the priest, it was even darker, if you can say so, because the parish priest, he was also a pedophile. That came out a few years later. Teresa was already an adult. She said that the priest used to visit her grandmother. Her grandmother was simply bedridden. She couldn't leave the house. He used to come to her. He talked to her grandmother, but also during that time when he was talking to her grandmother, he held little Teresa by the hand. She was only 13 years old at the time. But holding her hand wasn't enough for him. He forced Teresa to do it. She was a 13-year-old child, to become his lover. And that's exactly what happened, because every encounter, every meeting with the parish priest, the child was deeply affected by it, and it lasted for 2 years. So she was his lover at the age of 13 to 15. She was deeply affected by it every single time. Whenever they became intimate, she took notes. And when the police were going through the notes, it turned out that there were exactly 40 of those encounters. That little Teresa. Her real name was different than Teresa, but that's how she's known in the official documents. The ones that were made public, she tried to save herself somehow. She didn't really have a way to tell anyone about all of this. She only had her grandmother, like a child, because the priest told her that there was nothing wrong with it, that everyone does it. Well, she was in some kind of trap. She confided only in her friend, her peer, and she said, "That Father Pleben, that's exactly how he treats her," to which her friend said that she can't advise her, because the priest does the same thing to her, so we can assume. Anyway, later it was initiated. A church proceeding was already started. Archbishop apologized. Proceedings were initiated against the priest. But that was long ago, years later. Well, summer vacation was ending. These are those days. The year 2006. But on September 24th, Angelika should come to work as usual, and suddenly, at work, at the house where she was taking care of the children, she simply didn't show up. They started to wonder what happened. Angelika, of course. Despite all of that, what I said earlier, all the girls. Everyone saw her that way too, in Scotland. That she is an honest girl from Poland who came here to earn some money. She does it honestly, conscientiously. Such a story had never happened before, because these people knew Angelika's older sister. They called her. She said she also didn't know what happened to her sister. Well, that was the first thought. We're going to the rectory, and we'll look for her at the priest's house. But he didn't even hide it. He was furious with Angelika. He said he doesn't care where she is, what's happening to her. Because, well, sort of, in his life, she's just not there anymore. So people started to wonder what could have happened. Angelika really wasn't anywhere to be found. She was well liked. People from the neighborhood got together, the neighbors. They even printed posters. They put those posters up around the area, and so it began to look for her. Naturally, people asked. Since it was an open secret, they asked Martin. But even he didn't know what happened to his lover, simply. Angelika disappeared at night. It happened at night. From the 23rd to the 24th of September, she vanished without a trace. They even called Poland to check if she had returned. But it turned out that she hadn't gone to Poland either. She came back. The police were notified. The police started talking here. I think that's when people from this parish started to talk. They began saying a lot, among other things, about the priest. Gradually, the picture of these relationships. For the police, it was becoming clear. Police officers. They came to the conclusion that Angelika's disappearance was not so accidental. That something had to happen. They searched the area. There was some information there that someone saw a similar girl. But it all turned out to be untrue. They came to the conclusion that there is no other way. If Angelika is somewhere, and basically, if something happened, then we need to search the church grounds. On the fifth day, September 29th, the police brought a ground-penetrating radar. They took it into the church, and they started moving it around across the floor, across the pavement. Near the confessional, ground-penetrating radar indicated something beneath the surface resembling human outlines. They tore up the floor, and then they saw at first a garbage bag. But in that garbage bag, it was horribly frozen, mutilated, human. A body, a terrifying sight, in a garbage bag. The body of a young girl. Next to it, a little bundle, wrapped in a rag. They opened that rag, and it turned out there was a bloody knife inside. Of course, everyone guessed that it was Angelika, that it was Angelika's body. They also did DNA tests. They confirmed it. It turned out that Angelika had been raped multiple times in such a brutal way that later the perpetrator stabbed her multiple times in the body. He just wanted to be sure that he would kill her, but I would say it's somehow bizarre. Because when he left Angelika, because under the floor by the convent, Angelika was still alive. She simply suffocated. She died in terrible agony. And the investigation, of course, it was initiated. First towards the priest, because he became the most suspicious one. In this situation, biological traces were found on the body, traces of semen. So there were DNA tests, of course, obviously. Most of you are wondering, did the priest do it or maybe Martin did it? The priest had a motive, because he was angry at Angelika. Martin maybe for that reason. That he eventually came to the conclusion that Angelika, maybe she was pressuring him to leave his wife. So those were the two most probable versions. DNA tests were done. But it turned out that neither Father Martin is a rapist, and it seems that he is not a killer. The police officers, of course, start searching. They start talking to other people who lived at that rectory. There also lived at that time a lady whose name was Rebecca Doherty, and she also said that, yes, she saw Angelika that evening when she disappeared. So from the 23rd to the 24th. But she saw her in the company of someone named Pat. This man, he's a 60-year-old man. He also lived at the rectory. Even the priest himself, the pastor, called him a gift from God because he was such a handyman. Smiling, very nice. A 60-year-old man, friendly to everyone. He could fix anything, whether it was about some painting maintenance, or a broken confessional, or other thing. Well, really, Pat, he could fix all of that. The data was searched. They tried to find some details about the name, about Pat's last name, who he was, and it turned out that such a person doesn't exist. So all his data, which were somewhere there at the parish house, were simply fake. However, with the body, as you remember, with Angelika's body, there were biological traces. Those biological traces were entered into the database. But Pat, only a certain Peter Tobin, a dangerous criminal who recently got out of prison for raping a 14-year-old girl. The police had Tobin's address. It turned out that he lives in Kent County. They set up a stakeout around his house there, and he did actually come back home. He was caught. He was still wearing the shirt he had on when he murdered Angelika. There were traces of her blood on that shirt. They also started searching the entire property. They started, and it turned out that the bodies of 2 young girls were buried there. Those young girls disappeared in 1991 before Tobin started serving his sentence for raping that 14-year-old girl. Because Tobin, this seemingly friendly 60-year-old man, was actually a serial killer. Those 2 young girls were brutally raped, murdered, and he buried them on his own property. Tobin confessed, and in fact he was charged with the murder of 3 people. During the trial, he said that he had killed a total of 48 women. It seems that this is probably not true, that he said it more to spite the police, so they would keep searching and remain uncertain about the fact that they weren't able to solve the other murders, because he said he killed 48 women, and now he just told them to go ahead and look. Tobin was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving his sentence in a prison in Edinburgh. Tobin has a life sentence. The police tried to link him to some other crimes, but they didn't succeed. He is 79 years old. In prison, he suffered both a heart attack and a stroke, but it seems to be a bit like the saying goes, bad things never die, because he is still alive. In 2023, he was diagnosed with cancer, but he is still there, functioning in his cell, sharing it with a pedophile. However, Father Playburn himself died in 2010. He didn't leave to, so to speak, answer for everything he did. But it can certainly be said that he wasn't a real priest. And that's the end of that story. Of course, as I said at the beginning, strange relationships between people. One of the strangest stories we've probably all heard. That's it for this story. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and of course, take care.